Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Health. I hope you're all cozy because it's time to talk about sex, pregnancy, and childbirth, or chapter 5 in our book. Okay, so we talked about how to be a biological male or a biological female. A lot of it depends on chromosomes, okay? We didn't go into a lot of the hormonal stuff. That's really something beyond this course, but we might talk about it a little bit today. But let's talk about how we're not just our X and Y chromosomes or our two X chromosomes. We actually have 46 chromosomes. We have 23 pairs, one coming from mom, one coming from dad. So we can't tell which one came from mom and which one came from dad when you do this, which is called a karyotype. But you just know that one came from mom, one came from dad. We're going to talk about why later. But we have 22 pairs of what are called autosomes. So auto means body, and we're not getting into the Latin. Or it means self, and then some means body. And so these are the ones that make up basically just your body doing its normal thing, your brain doing its normal thing, etc. The sex chromosomes, the X and Y chromosome, even though they all look like X's, whatever, we'll just ignore that. The X and the Y chromosome are the ones that control your biological sex, okay, for the most part. So where do these chromosomes come from? So with the exception of two cell types in our body, the red blood cells, which at maturity, red blood cells actually get rid of everything inside of them except for what carries oxygen, so the hemoglobin molecule, so they become that specific shape that they have with that little punch in the middle, little thumbprint, and it helps them be really, really efficient at carrying oxygen through our body. But that means they don't have any DNA, they don't have any chromosomes, which means if you give blood, I've had people ask me before, if I donate blood and then someone gets that blood and commits a crime, will my DNA be on the scene? No, because there's no DNA in red blood cells, and you're only donating red blood cells. So how do people find DNA from blood then? Well, it has to be pulled from white blood cells, which do have DNA in them. And that is not what you're donating when you're donating blood, okay? They don't take your plasma. Anyway, you can donate plasma, but it's a different thing. Okay, so the red blood cells don't have DNA. The gametes, or sex cells, our eggs and our sperm, come each with only 23 chromosomes, so one from each pair. So it could be from mom, it could be from dad. It's totally random which one ends up where. All eggs, because a biological female has, we'll get to it in a second, has two X chromosomes. Each egg will only have an X chromosome in it, and then 22 of the other chromosomes. In the case of sperm, though, sperm can have one X or one Y chromosome. So that means that sperm are the cells that determine if a baby's going to be a boy or a girl. Okay, so this is a picture of a cell covered in sperm cells egg cell, covered in sperm cells trying to fertilize that egg. Okay, so if this picture disturbs you, I recommend taking a deep breath, because we're going to have lots of very not graphic pictures, but very biological pictures throughout this lecture. Okay, so human female chromosomes are shown in this karyotype. So we have, again, so you can look at this and say, is this a body cell or is this a sex cell? Well, this must be a body cell because there are two of each chromosome. If there were only one of each chromosome, you would know it must be an egg cell, because egg cells have half as many chromosomes. Okay, and you know it's a female because there are two X chromosomes and not a Y chromosome. Okay, so remember, we do see people who have extra X chromosomes, or they have a Y and an X chromosome and two X chromosomes, or maybe they're missing one of their X's. We also see what's called trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. That's when you have an extra 21 here. This is one of the only other cases where you see an extra chromosome. Most of the time, if you get an extra chromosome, the fertilized egg won't even develop because it's just during the very, very early stages in pregnancy, the growing fetus, it's not even a fetus, it's a ball of cells, realizes something's wrong and it won't let it go forward. Okay, humans, mammals in general, tend to be very, very careful about making sure the right number of chromosomes are coming along. So what about this 21 situation? Well, 21st chromosome is the smallest of all the chromosomes, so it might be easy to slip through that checking system. And then what about the X chromosome? Well, how come you can get away with an extra X? Nobody knows. moving on. Here is a male karyotype, and you can tell this is a male body cell because, again, there are 2 pairs of chromosomes. And you might ask, wait a minute, these are straight lines, and back here they were X's. What gives? Good question. This means that the DNA is already replicated, and this means that the DNA has not replicated. So the DNA has not gone through its replication stage yet. Don't worry too much about it. Just know that if you see something by itself and something by itself, that's 2 different chromosomes. So you know this is a body cell because you have 2 for each of them. Except for over here in the sex cells, you have 1 X and 1 Y, which means this must be a male, a biological male. All right, so what's up with twins? What happens with twins? Okay, so in twins, there's 2 different things that can happen with twins. I don't know why this is in this place. This is kind of an out-of-place slide, but we'll talk about it anyway. So there's what are called fraternal twins. So this is a dizygotic. That means that 2 eggs came down and were both fertilized. Okay, that got too fast. So 2 eggs come down and they're both fertilized by 2 different sperm. Now it turns out we're told, oh, women only release 1 egg per month. That's it, no more than 1. Well, it turns out that's probably not true. It's looking more like we release 2 or 3 per month. It's just that some, even if they do get fertilized, something weird can happen and they don't go ahead and get retained throughout pregnancy. So fraternal twins happen sometimes when perfect situations happen, and you see this happening in families, running down through families, because it means that something else is also advantageous that's helping both fertilized ova be retained until the end of pregnancy. You also sometimes see identical twins. So this is a monozygote. A monozygote, that means that 1 fertilized egg split into 2 pieces, or 2 different embryos, sorry, not 2 pieces. And this is formed very early during development in pregnancy. You end up with, they're identical. They have to be the same sex. If you've ever seen identical male-female twins, they're actually not identical. They just are very, very strongly they have very, very similar genes, but they're not identical. They have to be the same sex if they're identical, at least the same biological sex. And yeah, that's how you, and let's see. So dizygotic twins have 2 separate placentas, whereas monozygotic twins share the same one. All right, so what is up with everything? What's happening? So what are our sex chromosomes doing? Sex chromosomes determine what type of gonads, the testis or the ovaries, are going to develop in the embryo. Okay, cool. So your chromosomes tell you, hey, make a testis. Hey, make an ovary. Okay, so remember, this is why in cases like Klinefelter's, where you had XXY, it gets confusing. So the Y chromosome is saying, hey, make testes, but that 2X situation is saying, no, make ovaries, and you get, instead of getting 1 full signal, you get 2 half signals, and then nothing happens as a result. You get, depending on what else is happening, you could get a hermaphrodite situation. In that case, you could get neither happening, etc. So cool. So that's all the sex chromosomes do. They tell you, basically, there's a little bit more complication going on, but the chromosomes say if you're going to make testis or ovaries. Okay, then the testes or the ovaries are what make the hormones, okay? The chromosomes do not make hormones. The chromosomes make the organs that make the hormones, okay? So what hormones are we talking about? We're talking about estrogen and testosterone. We tend to associate testosterone with males and estrogen with females, but it's important to note that males and females both have both kinds of hormones. So testosterone is what drives masculine patterns, but it's not only found in males. Okay, same thing with estrogen. We see estrogen in males and females. It's just at much higher and cyclical patterns in females. Okay, so the brain actually is what causes the first production of hormones. Okay, so we have these structures in the brain that are directing everything. They're called the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So these two, the hypothalamus takes in seasonal information. It takes in, are you stressed right now? Have you had enough food right now? Do we smell that pheromone that smells so sexy? What is happening? And then the hypothalamus says, hey, pituitary, tell everything. It's time to get it on. Okay, or let's make some puberty happen. That's how I remember pituitary. puberty. Anyway, so the female sex hormones are then directed. So the pituitary says, hey, ovaries, let's make a whole bunch of estrogen. Oh, we also need progesterone because it turns out women's stuff is a bit more complicated than males. We're going to talk about that. Cool. So then, if you're dealing with the biological male, the hypothalamus takes in, how is it time for puberty? Are we past puberty? Is it, what, are you healthy? Are you too stressed out? Do you have illness, etc.? If everything's good, the whole hypothalamus says, hey, pituitary, go wake up those testes and the adrenal glands. So adrenal sounds a lot like adrenaline. That's where adrenaline's made. Interesting. And both the testes and the adrenal glands make testosterone. Okay? So this is really, really important during fetal development. It is what's going to, and actually both the estrogen and testosterone are key in fetal development. Estrogen will masculinize the brain, while testosterone goes and starts to, it kind of primes a lot of things so it'll be ready to go masculine later during puberty. Okay? All right, oh, look at that, puberty. Let's keep going. So puberty starts about 10 or 11 for boys and around 8 for girls. Okay, so it's partly because there's so much going. So okay, well let's get to it. So what happens at puberty? The brain suddenly says, "Hey, make those hormones." Because if we go back to this idea of testosterone, what it's doing is so you may think, well, females can't make testosterone. We don't have testes, but we do have adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands do make testosterone in enough of a dosage that we can use it for this idea of setting up the receptors that will then be ready for the hormones when it's time for puberty. In the case of females, or in the case of the males, how do they make estrogen? Well, estrogen can be made in fat cells. And so that is where if male estrogen can come from fat cells. Okay, cool. Let's keep going. So what is happening? The brain starts to make new hormones. So the brain starts to wake up the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland to say, hey, you've been doing a great job dealing with stress and dealing with growth and development, but now we're ready to get this body ready to have babies someday, so let's do it. So you make what are called gonadotropins, which means grow them testes or grow them ovaries, okay? So there are a couple. One is called follicle stimulating hormone, and you do need to know these specific hormones because they're very important. If you've ever done any kind of fertility treatment, you know them very well. Okay, so FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, is present in males and females, and it's released from the pituitary gland. So is luteinizing hormone, or LH. Okay, both of these are present, the hypothalamus sends a hormone to the pituitary, and then the pituitary makes both of these. And both of these hormones go and they tell the ovaries or the testis to mature. Okay? And then I don't know why I wrote these in capital letters, but that's okay. Once the ovaries and the testes mature, they can start making sex hormones. So they can start to make the estrogen and the testosterone that will then create secondary sex characteristics in your body. So here's the thing. You always have the receptors that are just waiting for the hormones. It's basically like the lock has been there the entire time, just waiting for the brain to release the key. So we see a lot of cases where you may have like a bodybuilding dad who is taking anabolic steroids like artificial testosterone, and for some reason you start to see that his young son will start to develop abs. Well, kids aren't supposed to have abs. They shouldn't have that definition. That's something that starts to develop with age when those muscles start to get those kinds of connections. Okay, you also might see these kids start to or the boys start to have beards really young, and it's kind of weird. Why would that happen? You might see the female children of bodybuilders who take steroids start to get their period so young. What's happening? Well, it turns out steroids leak through our skin. Okay, they're fat based, they're not water based, and so they leak through our skin. If you're taking a lot of steroids, a lot of it leaks through your skin, and if you then touch your kids, well, if it leaks through the skin, it can be absorbed through our skin. And so if you are taking steroids and then hugging your kid, kissing your kid, you're putting steroids into their body at rates they're not used to. And so basically those locks suddenly have a key, and they suddenly go through puberty much earlier than the brain had wanted them to. Okay, so you cannot just, once those hormones are present, everything gets started. Okay, so dangerous. Think about that if you're considering taking anabolic steroids, which is not the best. We'll talk about why that is also later. Okay. Oh, yeah, P.S. Here comes some pictures. So in the case of what are female sex characteristics, secondary sex characteristics, we start to grow pubic hair, so you see that. You see further development of the clitoris and the labia. By the way, this is what I mentioned last time, where what you're seeing here is the vulva, not the vagina. The vaginal is internal, okay, so it is here. It goes and it hits the cervix, which is here. During puberty, the uterus will start to develop and you'll start to have periods, which is where you shed this inner lining. We're going to talk about that. You do, male or female, need to understand how a period works. Okay. From here, so the idea is, so if this is the labia, oh, and I make the big point about the difference between a vulva and a vagina, because a lot of times you hear things about should you wash your vagina or not? And the answer is no, because that is an internal structure. You should not be putting no part of your body should smell like roses and flowers and whatever, okay? That's not what humans smell like. Perfume is one thing. You should not put perfume in your vagina, because the idea is that is very close to your uterus, which is a very active organ. It is always creating new cell layers and then shedding them and creating new cell layers, etc., etc. You don't want to mess that up. It's very easy to get cancer there. And it's also very close to, you go through the uterus and go through the fallopian tubes, and then you get to the ovary. And that's where the eggs are. And you have your eggs from before birth. What a good test question or quiz question. When are eggs developed? You are carrying the egg that made you, boy or girl, was in your mother when your grandmother was pregnant with her. Okay, so a female develops her eggs before she is born. And those are the only eggs she's going to get her entire life. So it's very strange to think of this idea that your grandmother, when she was pregnant with your mother, was carrying the egg that became you. Okay, so when she was still in your grandmother's uterus. Crazy town. That does not happen with sperm. Sperm are created every day. So that is not what's happening there. And sperm don't start getting created until puberty. So it's kind of a lot of pressure to say, hey, every egg I will ever have, I already have in my body, and good luck. But you have millions. And then, you're born with like 200,000. By the time you get to puberty, you have like 20,000, and you release one or two or three a month, so you're doing okay. It's when we'll talk about it. Okay, what else is happening here? This diagram, the idea is if you don't understand what's happening here, we basically sliced someone in half at the leg. So here is where there's the mons pubis. Okay, here's where pubic hair would be. Here is this is giant looking thing is the bladder. So even if you crazy really have to pee, this will never get so big that it explodes. Okay, okay, we'll go into it later. I'm just gonna talk about it now. So, the idea is when you need to pee, what's happening is your bladder is filled to a certain capacity. It's filled to a certain capacity, and then it sends a little bit of urine down, and the urine puts pressure on the sphincter at the urethral opening, and that sends a signal to your brain saying, hey, can we pee right now? And we know by social training, by potty training, that no, it is not the time to pee. Calm down. Until you go to the bathroom, and then, hey, now you can pee. As you get older, people think, oh, my bladder's getting weaker. That's not true. It's actually your brain that says, I don't care anymore. Yes, let's go pee now. And so you have that signal to be like, let's go to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom again and again. When you're pregnant, however, if you'll notice, the uterus sits literally right on top of the bladder. That's going to squish the bladder down, so then it can't hold as much urine, and so then it's going to be sending that signal, hey, let's go to the bathroom a lot more frequently. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, I didn't finish my idea about the vulva vagina thing. Okay, so when people say, should you wash your vagina? No, leave it. It's got everything taken care of. However, you should wash your vulva, which is the external portion. Okay, so that's very different. Okay, so this is looking at just the reproductive system. So now we're looking at face forward. So again, the pubic hair would be here. This is the vagina. We're looking at it more close up now. Here is where the labia are. So this is the external. This would be the vulva. So you can see that the vagina leads up to the cervix. The cervix is the opening to the uterus, and then the uterus has two options. You can either go into this fallopian tube to get to this ovary, or you can go into this fallopian tube to get to this ovary. Don't worry about this internal os, external os, whatever. You may notice that, or you may not be able to tell that the ovary is not connected to the fallopian tube. And if you think about it, this only occurred to me recently. This makes a lot of sense. If you have a whole lot of sperm coming down and they're all so excited, if they are on this trajectory that they go, they're going to end up in the body cavity and just get absorbed, just destroyed and absorbed before they have the chance to invade all of the eggs that are in development on the ovary, which would be a disaster. We're going to talk about something called ectopic pregnancy, which is where pregnancy happens in the fallopian tube, which can kill you. So the idea that we'll get to it. So that's really important. So I'm getting all ahead of myself because it's so exciting, you guys. Okay, ovaries are the female gonads, the female reproductive organs, okay? The rest is all accessory organs. The ovaries produce eggs. They produce hormones. Let's go. Okay, so actually this is exciting. So this is a laparoscopic view. So this is an internal camera showing this white part as the ovary. You can see where one egg is starting to develop. And then the fallopian tube, it's kind of hard to tell here, but the fallopian tube is this tube that's going off to the uterus. So it's a lot easier to look at from this point of view. So what's happening here? The ovaries are creating estrogen and testosterone. They have told you to start doing secondary sex characteristics such as growing pubic hair, armpit hair, have a period, but they do a lot more than that. They also tell you to start creating a secondary kind of sweat, which is mostly, it's got a lot of oils in it, and this is the sweat that's released when you are emotional, okay? So this is when you're really nervous, you release this sweat. When you're that's really the sweat that's released when you're really nervous. You're also just always kind of releasing a little bit of it because that oily sweat contains hormones, because again, they're not going to be released in normal sweat because you don't they aren't. Normal sweat is just water and salt and any kind of waste products your body's trying to get rid of. So hormones, the sex hormones are steroids and they can't be dissolved in that. But the oily sweat, the secondary kind that's released from different sweat glands, are released when you're emotional, and that can be when you're aroused, that can be when you're fearful, that can be when you're really happy, etc. And that's the kind that makes BO, or body odor, because that oily sweat also contains it's got all these chemical signals which bacteria love to eat, and then when they eat it, they poop, and that poop is what smells, and that is body odor. So if you are working out, your working out sweat is not always, it's not going to be primarily just that body odor sweat. It's going to be your aerobic sweat, okay? That doesn't start to smell. It's when you also are then releasing a little bit of that oily sweat, or you get nervous, and then that sits for a little while, then that'll start to smell, okay? So keep that in mind. If you're worried that you have excessive body odor, it could be that you just need to either change when you take your shower or take more frequent showers. All right, so we looked at that. This is what is happening. So let's say a bunch of sperm enter the vagina, and then they get in through the cervix, and then they're going through the fallopian tube. And then, oh my goodness, the egg has to leave here very quickly in order to get across this open space between the ovary and, so this looks like a tube. This is actually just connecting the ovary so it doesn't float away. But the egg has to be shot out of the ova very violently, kind of like popping a zit. And that's the only way that it can get into the fallopian tube, where the sperm are waiting, okay? So these little projections, these are called fimbriae, and they're basically beating the water so that, or the fluid in the body, so that the egg wants to go this way, and all the sperm are going to end up going that direction eventually if they get broken down, okay? Because the egg doesn't want to follow the flow of the sperm, because then it'll end up in the body cavity, and that's not great. It wants to move in the opposite direction, so these fimbriae help draw the egg into them. Okay, so the fimbriae draw the egg in. There's also, the entire system is lined with cilia, which when the sperm are going, help the cilia. So cilia are these little hairy bits, and they, as well as the fimbriae, they're kind of, it's all related. They move the egg, especially once it's been fertilized, they start to move it down the fallopian tube because the sperm hit the egg in the fallopian tube, and then one will fertilize it. You don't want to have more than one fertilize it. That's a bunch of craziness. It usually just shuts the whole system down. So once you have an egg that's been fertilized by a sperm, that's called a zygote. The zygote is then moved by that cilia down, 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 down into the uterus. Okay? Unless it isn't, and you get an ectopic pregnancy. So if for some reason your cilia is not functional, cilia die with nicotine. So if you're a smoker, the cilia in your lungs die very quickly. That's why you get that smoker cough. You can't get rid of your mucus. In the case of the cilia here, if they are not as functional, the egg will get stuck in the fallopian tube, and if it's fertilized and it's a zygote and it starts developing into a baby, if it develops into a fetus in your fallopian tube, well, one of the things it does is it starts sending out a signal saying, hey, feed this growing fetus. We got to get this thing fed. We got to make sure it survives. And it starts pulling blood from everywhere and can actually cause you, once it's doing that, it's creating these kinds of veins and arteries. Those can rupture and you can bleed out from your fallopian tube. And these will call for emergency surgery if you are found to have an ectopic pregnancy. Usually nothing can be done about it, and you just have to know, well, let's try again, because you can't. There's nothing you can't just then implant it in the uterus because so much stress has been done to the body at that point that it won't be viable. All right. Here is literally, so this is the follicle, the end of the fallopian tube, waiting for the ovary to let go of this egg or this oocyte, okay? So it's waiting for it to go pop and shoo, go in that direction. Uterine tube is the same as a fallopian tube, by the way. So, pop quiz. That was a weird way to say it, but how many chromosomes are in the egg or the oocyte? 23! Okay, remember, half of your chromosomes are in your sperm or egg cells, because once that sperm meets that egg, you put 23 and 23 together. Oh, hey, we have 46 again. You don't want to have 46 and then 46 again, because then you're going to get someone with twice as many of all the chromosomes, and that's just not going to work. Evolution has said, no, that's too many chromosomes. Calm down. Don't do it. Okay. Here is a picture of an egg during surgery. This is the ovary, and this is the part of the the ovary that is developing. It's called a corpus luteum. We'll talk about that later. And you can see an egg literally getting ready to pop out of this corpus luteum of the ovary. This doctor was doing some other surgery on this patient and just looked down and was like, what is happening? This is the end of a very spiky tool. It's just that it's I think actually these are forceps holding it open. They're like fancy tweezers. Whoops. And he is just for scale. And this had never been recorded before, so it's very exciting to see this is the egg as it is leaving the ovary. All right. What else is happening? Cool. What is this thing? The uterus. It is this big, muscular, pear-shaped organ. It's probably about the size of your fist. It is midline, tends to be midline. When you go in to get if you're a female, if you go in to get your yearly pap smear, what happens is they go in and they take a smear of the cervix. So they have to use a speculum to open the vagina enough to get a tool in that they can take a lining, they can get a scraping of the cervix. So this is usually closed by some cells. And then they go and they screen it to make sure all the cells are normal, because again, the cervix is always changing its cell type, which means it's very easy to get cancer there. Any cell type that is changing very frequently is at risk of getting cancer, at a higher risk than most other things. Okay, the endometrium. What's up with the endometrium? That means that is the lining of the uterus. Okay, so this is showing it as this red part. Okay. This is shed every month at menstruation. So this is also where, if you are pregnant, even if you're not pregnant, whatever comes out of that fallopian tube, either a zygote, so a fertilized egg, or an unfertilized egg, comes in, implants in the endometrium. So if you are someone who has a period and you every month are like, oh my God, again with the period, or you might say, oh my God, yes, period, not pregnant, whichever side, okay? You may wonder, why do we do this every month? What is up with this? Why don't we just make why don't we do a period, or, why don't we just grow this when we're pregnant. And for some reason, evolution said, you know what, let's just be careful and be ready for a pregnancy every month just in case. And then if it doesn't work, just get rid of it all. We'll start over again next month. Okay, so for some reason in evolution, that has been what works for humans. In other animals, they have to get impregnated before they even start developing half of the uterus. That's just what evolution has decided is most efficient for them. Whatever. This is what happens for us. Okay, so here is another representation I thought was useful because, again, we don't really think about the internal and the external at the same time. The vagina, remember, is the hall. I've heard it called the baby hallway. It is just the tube that connects the outside to the cervix. Okay, this is a very muscular. Well, okay, just as in how the uterus is very muscular, the vagina is very muscular. Okay, and that part of this is it wants to. When females orgasm, there is a bit of a muscular contraction to help move whatever is in the vagina up towards the cervix. And another part is it helps in, well, it doesn't help so much in pregnancy. We'll get into that later. But there is... so we have natural bacteria. We talk about how you have you want to create a healthy internal biome. Usually when we talk about that, we're talking about your guts because people forget, oh, we also have bacteria in the vagina. Anytime you have an opening to the outside world, you need to protect it from stuff getting in that should not be there, okay? So this is a very large opening and a very long pathway that bacteria could go through to then get into a very sensitive part of the body that you really don't want to let. So there's so much blood and nutrients and everything here that this bacteria want to live here so badly. So the vagina actually secretes, the bacteria in the vagina secrete incredibly acidic waste, which it makes the vagina an incredibly acidic place so that other bacteria that are very sensitive to that cannot grow. Okay, so this is why you don't want to clean your vagina. You don't want to constantly be douching a vagina because you will clean out the bacteria you need in there that are helpful for protecting you against other bacteria. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what else is happening. We have these things called Bartholin glands. So Bartholin glands, if you look at this again, so I also want to point out, we mentioned how and it's a little bit about trans surgery. So I had a student ask, well, how do you do that? If you look at this, this is a muscular tube. Guess what? So is the penis. And so if you're going from a female to a male, one of the things you do is you take this tube and you do some surgery on it so that the clitoris, which is here, becomes the head of it. Okay? It's much more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea. Okay, so a Bartholin gland it helps produce some lubricant, and there's something similar in males called the Cowper's gland. So you'll notice these are very, very small glands, and the vagina is a large organ, so if you look at how long it is. So you need a lot more lubricant than just these glands can produce, and so what happens is you start to pull fluid directly from the bloodstream into the vaginal region, and that's where a lot of lubrication comes from. The Bartholin glands just help with that. Okay, so what is here? So the vulva, that's the external genitalia in females. We have the labia majora, the labia minora, the clitoris, which actually we found is not, and I say we because I'm just talking about scientists in general, but people have found the clitoris is more than just, so the clitoris is a bundle of nerves that exists at the top of the vulva, and it aids in, so there's a big argument over whether is the clitoris, quote-unquote, essential. Guess which side of the argument the males are on versus the females. I'll let you figure that out. So a lot of people say, well, it's just leftover because if this were a male, that would be the head of the penis. And so it's like males having nipples. It's not a big deal. Well, guess what? It contains a lot of nerves, and there is erectile tissue here, which is very similar to the penis. And actually, you see female bodybuilders that take anabolic steroids, so they're getting these super high doses of testosterone. The clitoris starts to look like a penis. Okay, so it has the receptors, and it has the lock there, and then you just need the key to make it happen. Okay, but the clitoris actually extends back beyond the external part and wraps around the vagina, and that's thought to be where the G spot is. That's why that's there. There's a lot of evidence saying that why would we have sex if it wasn't fun, if we're not going to have kids? And so the idea that females enjoy sex, oh, it's just evolutionary, blah, blah, that's silly. Of course, it should be a mutual, pleasurable thing, okay? Not going to talk about it anymore. You also, I want to point out, because a lot of people do not know, but in females, it's different from males. You do not pee from the same hole as you have sex or have babies, okay? So you'll notice that the urethral opening, this is what urine comes out of, is above the vagina. And so that's why you may have gotten advice that after you have sex, you should urinate. And so people argue, oh, the urine's going to clean the vagina. No, that's not what that is. The idea is it's very easy for females to get UTIs, or urinary tract infections, because if you go back to this picture, if this is the urethra, let's go back to this one. So if this is the urethra, and sex is happening, and there's fluids all up in this area, and bacteria, and it's very easy for some of this fluid to then get up into the urethra, or even in the first part of the urethra. Then bacteria from all of this, whatever, can start climbing up and get into the bladder itself. So right after sex, you want to urinate, because then that is going to flush out the urethra, so any bad bacteria in there will get out, okay? It's a little more complicated than that, but it's a good rule of thumb. All right, so let's go from those sex features and talk about some other secondary sex characteristics, which are the breasts. These are external structures. You see the nipple, which is here, and the areola, which is the colored part around it. Different things. You may actually, it's interesting to point out, when someone is breastfeeding, they may have what are called accessory nipples. So, and you may see this yourself, where you have it just looks like a little weird lump that you've had your entire life and it's never changed. That is just an accessory nipple, okay? So it's just another place where you'll have a connection to these glands that are going to release milk during pregnancy. Okay, so inside we have these alveolar glands, and we have a lot of adipose tissue. So that adipose tissue is there to help produce, so adipose means fat, and that's to help produce everything you need, the very high fat milk that you need when you're producing milk for babies, okay? These things change during pregnancy and lactation. Okay, so the very first milk you produce during lactation after pregnancy is called colostrum, and it has a whole lot of stuff that a newborn needs. This is why it's really important to breastfeed. Some people can't breastfeed though, and so people are getting better and better at making formulas that mimic breast milk as closely as possible. And the reason why is because for a long time we thought, well, breast milk is just milk, who cares? Just give them cow's milk. Well, we're not cows, and so it turns out there's a lot of things going on in human breast milk, such as immune cells that we don't have in very processed cow's milk. Okay, so that's not exactly the same thing. Okay, let's keep going. Let's talk about the menstrual cycle. Quickly, let's do it. So about every month. So there are people there's so many people that say, oh, well, the fact that the menstrual cycle is 28 days and so is the lunar cycle means that they have to be linked. No, it's just coincidental. It's just a very interesting coincidence, okay? But about every month, the endometrial wall, the wall of the uterus, thickens and then is rebuilt completely so that it can support a fetus, just in case this is the month that you get pregnant, okay? If fertilization does not occur, the endometrial wall is broken down and then is shed during menstruation. And this is when you discharge blood. It's not just blood, though. It's also that endometrial wall, so it's a different texture. It's a different color. We'll leave it there. This 28-day cycle is controlled completely by hormones, and it's not always 28 days. It can be 23 days. It can be 34 days. It's all up to how your body cycles hormones, okay? So again, there's LH and FSH, which we talked a little bit about before. And so LH, remember, is the LH and FSH are the ones that go and cause the development of the ovaries and the testes. So what's happening here? These are hormones that are made in the pituitary. So the pituitary gland, if you take your tongue and you run it over the top of your mouth and you feel your hard palate, and then you keep going and you feel your soft palate behind your hard palate, that right above that is your pituitary gland, okay? So it's a very important little pea-sized gland that is controlled by the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus sits just right above it, and that's what takes in all the signals from everything else in the brain and says, okay, we're ready. let's make some sex hormones. But the pituitary gland is the one that then sends out the signals to the rest of the body so that everything gets going, okay? So let's say that we're just talking sex hormones. So the pituitary gland makes LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone. And these two protein hormones, so they're not steroids, were identified first in females. And so they were named for what they do in the females. They do something similar in males, but they just didn't change the name because that's silly. Okay, the targets, they're made in both men and women, but the targets are different. Okay, so LH in men stimulates the production of testosterone. FSH is going to control the production of sperm. So LH says, let's make testosterone. And FSH, so testosterone is what signals that you should start making sperm, but FSH controls when it happens. Okay, so you need both. Okay. In women, LH and FSH both help regulate the menstrual cycle and when eggs are ovulated. Very important things for the quiz. All right, so this is a close-up of an ovary, and the idea is you're looking at day 1 of a cycle through day 7, okay? So at day 1, you have this primary follicle, so your ovary is full of 20,000 eggs, minus however many you've already ovulated, okay? It starts to grow because you get signals from FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Guess what? Eggs before they're eggs are called follicles, and then they're stimulated by follicle stimulating hormone. Yay! So that makes sense. And then it starts to develop, and it has this accessory thing, that red thing in that picture I showed you before. It's called the corpus luteum, the body of something, luteum, whatever that means. I think it's a color. And it keeps growing, and you'll notice it starts to the egg gets pushed to the outside and pushed to the outside, and once it's ready, LH comes in, and it causes, LH gets released, and it causes a surge of estrogen, and that surge of estrogen says, pop out that egg, and it violently erupts, and then there's the follicle sitting right, oh goodness, too many F words, the fallopian tube right here getting ready to catch that egg. So you'll notice this part's left behind. So that empty follicle, after the egg is released, it doesn't just die. It turns out it goes into its second job. So its first job was to help the egg develop, and that was using the hormone FSH. So then, after LH comes in and says, more estrogen, make that egg happen. Well, LH keeps going, and it's called luteinizing hormone because it helps in the development of the corpus luteum, which is that leftover part which starts making progesterone. Okay, so progesterone, you may know, is the hormone that's involved in the birth control pill, and it tricks your body into thinking you're pregnant. That's kind of the easy way to think of it. What it does in the ovary is it tricks your body into thinking you're in this stage, which is the let's get the uterus ready, the egg was just released, we're just going to sit here and let the uterus do its thing. So it's not going to restart the cycle over. So that's the corpus luteum's big job. It releases progesterone and a hormone called just mostly progesterone. It does it for about a week until the uterus is ready to take it over and start, until the uterus creates the placenta, and then the placenta takes over the progesterone production. If it doesn't get a signal after that time, 2 or 3 days or a week or whatever, the corpus luteum just dies and it's done, and then it's ready. The cells that are here are ready to help another egg grow into the next phase if you don't get pregnant. All right, so there's 4 cycles to the menstrual phase. The menstrual cycle has 4 phases, okay? You have you always start menses, so that's the first day you see blood is day 1. And then you go into your estrogenic phase. So that is when you have a bunch of estrogen happening. Okay, you have like a pretty constant level of estrogen. The endometrium starts to thicken because you've gotten rid of all of that blood already, the menstrual blood itself. So this is between when you have your period and ovulation. Okay. So during this period, during this time, the endometrium's thickening and it's getting ready, and then boom, ovulation happens. The egg is released into the fallopian tube. This is going to then, this happens because of a surge in estrogen and LH, and these also change your behavior. So one thing estrogen does is it causes you to retain water in different ways. It makes your hips curvier, it makes your breasts fuller, and it starts to make you behave in ways to try to attract a mate or to get sex to happen, okay? It also, remember, estrogen's a steroid. It leaks through the skin as a pheromone, and that can be picked up by fertile males. So there was a study done where people went to a strip club and they asked the dancers to keep track of their periods and how many tips they made, how much they made in tips. So the goal is always make as much in tips as you can, dance your best, get the best customers, whatever you have to do. And they found a very clear correlation that whenever the females were ovulating, they got the best tips. So was it that they smelled like they were fertile? Did they dance sexier? Did they look who knows? But maybe a combination of all of the things. But that was when they got the most tips. Whereas the people who were on their periods, which was the time when you're least likely to get pregnant, got the least number of tips. So you don't get to go home just because you're having your period, unfortunately. So these people are still trying to get the most money, but they are not. Either they're putting their heart and their soul into it, but for some reason they don't get as many tips. So there's something different in happening there when you're not ovulating. Okay, so then what happens? So you're the most fertile during ovulation, and then you go into the we're not going to worry about pronouncing that word, the progesterone phase, which is the last 2 weeks. And so the first 2 weeks are all estrogen-based, the last 2 are all progesterone-based, and this is when your body's like, this is it, this is the time I get pregnant. We're going to develop that endometrial lining, we're going to feed the egg. There's this thing in the fallopian tube that has been affectionately called the womby, what is it called? The, sugar womb room is what it's called. So it's a part of the fallopian tube that just releases a whole lot of sugar. So if any sperm are coming through, they get to eat that sugar. They absorb the sugar. They don't have mouths. And then they get an extra boost to get to the egg. If the egg is coming down and it gets there, it gets that sugar and it gets a little boost to help it survive until it gets the endometrium. And then it just waits and it says, yep, this is it. We're pregnant. Oh, wait, we're not pregnant. Oh, then we're going to start over. We're going to shed that lining and go back to the menstrual cycle and start it all again. All right, so like I said, FSH is going to stimulate the follicles to secrete estrogen in the first half. You get this surge of LH that releases the egg. That's ovulation in the middle. Ovulation, by the way, can be so violent that some women can feel it. They feel a little twinge, okay? So there's that. So LH also continues the stimulation of the follicle that's now empty to become the corpus luteum. So LH, that L is for luteinizing, and the luteum, that's what it's doing, okay, luteinizing the luteum. So then the corpus luteum secretes the progesterone that then maintains the endometrial cycle. Once progesterone is gone, the endometrial lining is shed, and then you have your period. Okay, that kind of just does it in yeah, we'll keep going. So what happens after ovulation? After ovulation, if the egg is not fertilized, the corpus luteum is going to break down either way, okay? Progesterone drops, bottoms out. Sometimes this bottoms out so heavily that people have really huge, they have really intense mood swings. So this is not, everyone likes to blame everything on PMS. It's more complicated than that, and anyone who says that is a jerk. Okay, we're just going to put it out there. Yeah, but yes, you do see big shifts in mood sometimes with either estrogen surging or dropping or progesterone surging and dropping. And a lot of times people who don't go through this don't understand because especially biological males, you have a constant level of testosterone. It's always at a constant level. You don't have these huge drops and these huge spikes. So it's a harder thing to understand. Okay, so the egg is gone. So the estrogen levels drop, okay? Menstruation is what we call day 1 of our cycles. If the egg is fertilized, yeah, you're pregnant, and that's called a zygote, okay? And remember, fertilization happens in the fallopian tubes, and as soon as fertilization occurs, you start doing mitosis. So you're going to start going through cell division, and then that's called, once you have more than one cell, which is just a fertilized egg cell, you're called an embryo. Okay, let's talk a little bit about PMS or premenstrual syndrome. So this can be anything from physical discomfort, from bloating, breast tenderness, headache, because you're changing where water is being stored in your body so some people might notice very much that you start to retain water in your guts instead of in your hips after ovulation. Okay, you might have breast tenderness because estrogen and progesterone levels can also affect your breasts. Okay, you could see emotional distress. We actually don't understand yet why this happens, but we do see that sometimes when estrogen bottoms out and progesterone starts to go up, when both of them are bottomed out, there's a point when they're both bottomed out, you see a lot of anxiety, irritability, and tearfulness, And imagine you're just this very important hormone, these two very important hormones are suddenly both gone, and what steroid's left? The stress steroid. And so that could be part of what's happening and kind of taking over. Okay? You get a lot of appetite changes and food cravings. You could, anyway. This could happen for 2 weeks prior to menstruation because it's such a huge biological change every month, and it's just something that you get used to. Or if you have incredibly intense symptoms, you can go in and have hormonal treatments or take birth control so that you can kind of be on a more even level all the time. Okay. So, we think it's caused by progesterone imbalance. Progesterone and estrogen can also start to affect your thyroid, and your thyroid is what's controlling your metabolism, so that could be why you see appetite and food craving changes. And this is literally affecting your brain, so anytime you start to mess with the brain, you start to get mood differences, okay? There's also, if you are stressed and you're going through this hormone change, well, now you've got 3 different steroids that are all in different balances, and they're all doing weird different things, and your brain is trying to make sense of it while also letting you live your life. It's very, very complicated. All right. So there's all these things that people think they put out there for preventing PMS. They change every week. Basically, you just find something that helps you with your symptoms, okay? So some people say if you get a lot of exercise, you have fewer problems. Even if you're not super hungry, make sure you're eating on a schedule. In the week before your period, you don't regulate your sugar as well as you usually do because your body's like, yes, pregnant. Oh, wait, are we pregnant? Oh, it's getting confused, and so it's not going to regulate sugar as well. If you're using a lot of salt in your cooking, it's always good to kind of regulate your salt levels anyway. But if anytime you are retaining salt, you also retain water, which is how you're going to feel bloated. Okay. Water, a lot of times when people have headaches, the first thing we say is go drink water, okay? And that could be something about salt. Same thing with caffeine, which is found in cola, coffee, even diet sodas, tea, also chocolate. I had a Mormon student argue with me very violently once, not violently, but vehemently, that the thing in chocolate that makes it chocolate isn't caffeine, it's theobromine. And that's true. It is theobromine that makes chocolate chocolate, but chocolate also has caffeine in it, okay? Yeah, we'll just leave it there. For some reason, caffeine increases breast tenderness. It also causes females to develop cysts in their breasts, especially around the period. So that can be something to think about when you are loving that coffee. Drinking and smoking is always going to exacerbate a lot of effects during a period, okay? Because you're, for many reasons. We'll get into it later. And let's keep going. All right. So, what if you have periods shouldn't be painful, but if while you're on your period it's very, very painful, it's because your uterus is literally, I don't think okay, let me take that back. Periods can be very painful. Cramps can be very painful. Because if you think about it, you have this thing, it's about the size of your fist, trying to squeeze out part of it, and so it's very, very muscular, and it starts just going through these huge contraction periods to try and get everything out. Now, there is something in sperm that it's called a prostaglandin. It's made in the prostate gland. It's a hormone that we also create naturally in the uterus, which helps you. It causes contractions. So in sperm, what it's doing is causing the uterus to contract to help the sperm move up the uterus towards the fallopian tubes. But during your period, what it's doing is it's causing the uterus contract in the opposite direction to squeeze out the uterine lining. So if you take Tylenol, which turns off prostaglandins, you're much less likely to go through cramps. Okay, so that's my little secret biological thing. If you're taking medicine for period cramps, it's Tylenol that turns off prostaglandins, which means you won't have cramps. Okay. Amenorrhea is when you stop menstruating altogether. This could be if you have a hormonal disorder. It could be if you have huge weight loss. So one of the things in the stress response is and one of the things the hypothalamus is always looking for is, do I even have enough nutrition to go through a hormonal cycle to have babies? Okay, if you are incredibly stressed out, if you are incredibly, if you're going through a lot of exercise, if something drastic has changed in your environment, you're suddenly going to go your body's going to say, we are too stressed, we don't have the resources to go through a period, so we're just not going to do it. So sometimes this happens. Sometimes people get this just, for what it seems like a very normal thing. So strenuous exercise, once you do really heavy exercise, you start to release more testosterone, and that testosterone can compete with the estrogen that's causing regular cycling, and that can cause amenorrhea, okay? Do I want to go into those? Yeah, okay, let's finish off females, and then we'll do males tomorrow. So in females, once your follicles stop responding to FSH, you no longer have periods. That is called menopause. So the ovaries basically just stop listening to the brain. They stop functioning. They're going to decrease estrogen. Now this is bad because estrogen does so many different things besides just making babies. Okay, so estrogen it regulates a lot of body temperatures. It's what makes us grow during puberty. If without it, for some reason, we get hot flashes and all these other symptoms. Without it, for some reason, our bones start to get really brittle. And so it's really important if you are close to menopause or in menopause to take hormone replacement therapy. It's getting better and better, and so it's helping people avoid the hot flashes and especially the osteoporosis. Okay, in males, we see that you have a gradual decrease, which people have affectionately called andropause, because you're not getting as many androgens. That general decrease in testosterone can change your arousal patterns. And sometimes your brain can be just raring to go and ready for sex, but the penis doesn't respond, and that is erectile dysfunction. But it turns out that's a very easy thing to fix. That's a one hormone, one pill, one stop shop. No, we'll get into it later because I don't want to get too far off track. So you see that there's this huge variance in when people start to go through different parts of their cycling. So the first period can be anywhere from 8 to 16. Okay, so this is even different. It's kind of odd to think of, but 16 is a reproductive year. You could even, you shouldn't, but people as young as 9 can have babies. They should not, okay? Our body is not ready for that kind of thing, and our society isn't either, okay? But so you go through you peak in fertility and you're between 16 and 30-ish, okay? You start to have progressively declining fertility as you get into your 40s, and then your menstrual cycle starts to vary a lot, especially if you're not on any kind of birth control in your 40s, and then 40s and 50s you start to become perimenopausal, which is where you're almost menopausal but not quite yet, and then you go into menopause and postmenopause, and that's when a lot of different things can start to change in your body, and this becomes a very stressful point in some people's bodies because all of a sudden their body is not doing what it's been doing for the entire time they can remember it, okay? So it's not just periods and sex, it's everything else. And so this becomes a very fragile time psychologically as well. So stay supported all the time in many different ways. Okay, so we're going to stop here because it's been a long lecture. We'll do males tomorrow, and have a great day. Bye.